Hi, Gary DeWaal here, and this is another Bridging the Week for the week August 26th to 30th, and after the three-day Labor Day weekend here in the United States, today is September 3rd. Good morning. Well, it seems fitting that as summer unofficially ends here in the United States and the new school year is about to begin for students, regulators have issued a few report cards on the rollout of some important worldwide regulatory initiatives, as well as issuing a few salient big life messages. 1. Lying is very bad, especially to your chief compliance officer. And 2, don't try to hide your big mistakes, especially when they have cost your firm a lot of money. Moreover, the Financial Stability Board, the high-level international coordinator of worldwide national financial authorities, has called for changes and potential changes in the way that financial services firms conduct securities lending and repurchase activities. If implemented, these ideas could pose yet another material threat to potential revenue by financial services industry players. By the way, this beginning September and near the end of many firms' 2013 fiscal years, futures commission merchants, swap dealers, and major swap participants, let alone designated clearing organizations and swap data repositories, should have begun by now preparatory work for the annual compliance report required to be filed shortly after the end of their 2013 fiscal year. Be sure to check out some hopefully helpful practical guidance I expect to be publishing on my website later this week entitled, It's 10 p.m. Future Commission Merchants, Swap Dealers, Major Swap Participants. Do you know the status of your firm's 2013 Annual Compliance Report preparation? Back to matters at hand, however. First and foremost, last week, the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission brought and settled an enforcement action against the former external auditor to Peregrine Financial Group, Ms. Jenny Varaha Snelling. You will recall that Peregrine filed for bankruptcy in July 2012 after it was discovered that the firm's principal, Russell Wassendorf, had defrauded its customers by misappropriating more than $215 million of their funds. The CFTC claimed that Ms. Varaha Snelling failed to conduct audits of the firm in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and did not appropriately test internal accounting controls and procedures for safeguarding customer assets as required by a CFTC rule. For these violations, Ms. Varaha Snelling was permanently barred from practicing before the Commission. Ms. Varaha Snelling had served as Peregrine's outside auditor for the firm's fiscal years 2001 to 2011. For more details on this matter, see a separate article I posted on my website last week. Regarding the report cards I mentioned earlier, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision last week issued a report on the progress of G20 members and other countries implementing Basel III reforms. The bottom line? Of the 27 jurisdictions that comprise the Basel Committee, 25 now have issued final Basel III regulations, and internationally active banks appear likely to meet the complete set of fully phased and minimum Basel III capital requirements in advance of the 2019 deadline. Basel III, which was released in December 2010, imposes higher capital level and tougher liquidity requirements on banks. That being said, only 24 of the 27 Basel Committee member jurisdictions have fully implemented Basel II, let alone Basel III, with the biggest non-implementer being the, drumroll please, United States. Argentina and Russia are also members of this non-compliance club. I guess this is a case of don't cry for me, Argentina, Russia, and the USA. In another report card, the OTC Derivatives Regulators Group, which constitute the principals of the national authorities with primary regulatory oversight of OTC derivatives markets in a number of the critical worldwide markets, last week issued an update on agreed understandings to resolve cross-border conflicts, inconsistencies, gaps, and duplicative requirements. Acknowledging the recently concluded July 2013 European Commission and U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission agreement on a common approach to cross-border derivatives reform, the report restates the need for all members of the G20 to coordinate their cross-border rules and implementation schedules going forward in order to avoid, quote, market disruption and fragmentation, reduce liquidity in certain markets, and the concentration of risk within certain jurisdictions, end of quote. As the CFTC undertakes an analysis of the comparability of certain non-U.S. rules with U.S. rules to determine whether certain foreign entities can rely on the local rules as opposed to U.S. rules in connection with certain transactions with U.S. persons. The report ratifies the analytic approach proposed by the CFTC that comparability assessments may be made on a broad category-by-category basis rather than on the basis of the foreign regime as a whole. However, the report seems subtly to caution the CFTC to be flexible in its determination and recognize that one size may not fit all. According to the group, an equivalence or substituted compliance assessment should, quote, fully take into account international standards where they are appropriate, regulatory arbitrage, investor protection, risk importation, prudential, and other relevant considerations, end of quote. Regarding the life lesson messages by regulators, this week the CFTC filed and settled an enforcement action against Matthew Marshall Taylor, a former Goldman Sachs and Company trader, who allegedly defrauded Goldman Sachs during December 2007 when he manually entered certain fictitious trades into the firm's operation systems in order to disguise certain unauthorized futures transactions. Overall, as a result of Mr. Taylor's activities, Goldman Sachs sustained losses of over $118 million US and later paid its own CFTC fine of $1.5 million US for failure to supervise Mr. Taylor. For his offenses, Mr. Taylor himself agreed to pay a fine of $500,000 US and be permanently barred from trading or registering in the futures industry. The moral here? Don't be deceptive, and don't hide mistakes from your employer, particularly when they have been quite costly. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission also tried to teach an important life lesson this week. In bringing and settling an enforcement action against Carl Johns, the former portfolio manager of Boulder Investment Advisors, a registered investment advisor, and who for Boulder and an affiliated investment advisor routinely assisted in the management of portfolios of several affiliated registered investment companies, the SEC alleged that from 2006 to 2010, Mr. Johns, in order to conceal his personal trading, submitted false quarterly and annual reports and falsely certified his annual compliance with his firm's Code of Ethics. Moreover, said the SEC, Mr. Johns created several documents reported to be pre-clearance trading approvals by the fund's CCO, but in fact were fraudulent. After the fund's CCO discovered these irregularities, Mr. Johns continued his deception by telling him that all of his brokerage accounts were now closed and providing the CCO with hard copies of his trading statements that he had previously altered. For these offenses, Mr. Johns will pay disgorgement and prejudgment interest in excess of $225,000 US, a fine of $100,000 US, and be barred from the securities industry for at least 5 years. Lesson learned here? Don't violate a clear legal and company requirement for sure, but also don't lie to your CCO about your violations, particularly after you are caught being dishonest. By the way, interestingly, under SEC rules implementing the Investment Company Act, there is a specific provision that prohibits fund employees from engaging in any act that, quote, may directly or indirectly coerce, manipulate, mislead, or fraudulently influence the fund's CCO in the performance of his or her duties, end of quote. Also, as far as I can tell, there is no relation between Carl Johns and Carl Jung, although an interesting psychological approach seems to have been at play with both persons. Quickly and finally, you remember the Financial Stability Board? It was established after the 2008 financial crisis to coordinate at the international level national financial authorities and international standard-setting bodies. Well, last week, the Financial Stability Board issued a report regarding what sounded like a good and innocent initiative, strengthening the oversight and regulation of shadow banking. Hooray for that! Well, good news and bad news. Among the recommendations the Financial Stability Board issued are many that could materially impact securities lending and repo markets. These included recommendations that national authorities, in connection with securities lending and repo activities, adopt rules related to enhanced transaction reporting requirements, strengthen regulations regarding the hypothecation of customer securities, and minimum standards for collateral valuation. The board also recommended that national authorities evaluate introducing central clearing counterparties to interdealing repo markets where central counterparties currently do not exist. As part of its initiative, The board also issued a proposed regulatory framework for haircuts on non-centrally cleared securities financing transactions, for which it is seeking public feedback by November 28th. To me, this is potentially a very significant proposed development that warrants a lot of attention now. It could potentially impact the profitability of many financial services firms. And finally, a couple of follow-up matters. Remember 2 weeks ago I discussed a CFTC, SEC, and FINRA staff review of financial services firms' business continuity planning following their analysis after Superstorm Sandy? Well, the SEC has now issued a separate study of the impact of the same storm on investment advisors and issued separate recommendations for this group. Neither the findings nor recommendations are very different, but investment advisors probably should check this out. And remember, over the last month, I reported on the anticipated resumption of Treasury futures trading in China soon, as well as of the impact on the China markets of algorithmic trading gone wild by Everbright Securities on August 16th. Well, the media is reporting that CSRC has authorized Treasury futures trading to commence September 6th, and that it has fined Everbright 523.29 million yuan, that's 86 million US dollars, for its mistake. Ooh, that's a lot of money. Keep in mind, in less than 2 weeks, the Technology Advisory Committee of the CFTC, of which I am a member, will be receiving and considering the CFTC's concept release on automated trading, which should be quite interesting. Well, that's it for this week. Bridging the week. Until next week, this is Gary DeWaal, and have a great week, and don't forget to check out that article on the preparation of the firm's annual compliance report. So long.